A desolate forest road roamed by the infamous monster, the Grunch, a historic plantation harboring the restless spirits of those who lived and died on its lands, and a cathedral packed with paranormal activity courtesy of the cemetery it was constructed over. Await on this adventure through some of the most haunted places in Louisiana. Let's dive right in. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me on this journey through some of the most haunted places in the Bayou State of Louisiana. Recognized for its historic landmarks, unparalleled Cajun cuisine, eerily beautiful nature expanses, crazy Mardi Gras parties, and more, Louisiana is also undisputedly considered one of the haunted capitals of the United States, and as such, is chock full of ghost stories, tales of voodoo rituals, of witches, monsters, and so much more. Are you ready for what may very well be my creepiest upload yet? Let's get started, if you dare. Our first haunt takes us to southeastern Louisiana, just west of Lake Pontchartrain, to the Evergreen Plantation. The Evergreen Plantation, which is located out of Wallace, Louisiana, along the western banks of the Mississippi River, is an aged plantation complex toting a jaw-dropping 37 contributing buildings, and the titles of being both possibly the most complete plantation complex in the whole of the South, as well as one of its most haunted. Historically, Evergreen's roots stretch way back to the construction of its first home, being that of a Creole-style abode designed under plantation owner Christophe Heidel in 1777. However, only 11 years later, in 1788, this initial construct was damaged heavily in a hurricane, resulting by 1790 in the construction of the site's main home, and in the eventual reconstruction of the original Creole-style abode, within which Chris's cousin, Lezen, would reside. Later still, in 1799, Christophe's daughter, Magdalene Heidel Becknell, would move into the main home with her 8 children, all of whom had previously resided just downriver. Circa 1810, Magdalene would heavily modify Evergreen, adding wings to either side of the main structure to accommodate her large family. Over the years, the property would remain in family hands, and in 1835, Pierre Clydemont Becknell, in honor of his grandmother Magdalene, would remodel the front end of the dwelling to boast an Americanized facade, alongside an enclosed basement, federal-style doors, fan lighting, and a classical Greek Revival projection with columns and a winding staircase on the entry. As time passed, Evergreen would continue to operate until much later, in 1930, when the Great Depression resulted in its then owners abandoning the site. For a period, the property would be owned by the bank and would continue to produce sugarcane for the country. Beginning in the 1940s, the whole of the expanse was extensively restored, and in 1991, it would be added to the National Register of Historic Places, after which it was opened up to the public for tours and remains as such to this day. In the present, the Evergreen is a popular stop for historians, sightseers, tourists, and the like, and several of its emerging projects aim to remember the many enslaved individuals once held on its grounds, and whose work was utilized immorally for profit. Not surprisingly, the whole of Evergreen is rumored to harbor a host of restless spirits, including those of its formerly enslaved and of its past owners whose cruelty knew no bounds. And across the property, both staff and visitors have reported old-timey music heard drifting on the winds, the smells of cooking foods or of colognes and perfumes without source, and instances of doors and windows opening and closing by themselves. Near the slave cabins, many have told of run-ins with shadowy manifestations that dart in and out of the structures, and of items moving on their own, or even floating in midair. And a handful of informal investigations have yielded strange EMF fluctuations, crystal clear EVPs, and orbs captured in both photography and video. Lastly, on a number of occasions, along the main drive and right up to the front stairs, and especially during heavy fogs, staff and visitors to the site have told of hearing the phantom sounds of carriage wheels or of horse hooves, and on particularly humid or rainy days, prints and even old boot tracks have been discovered in fresh mud. And on to number 2, which has us exploring the state's capital city of Baton Rouge and its iconic Old Capitol building. The old Louisiana state capitol, which is located in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, is a former headquarters for the state's government that's since been turned into a museum that, in recent times, has grown to become popular amongst history buffs and tourists, and that's premises is rumored to host a number of restless spirits straight from the Bayou State's past. Historically, while the seat of government in Louisiana was initially New Orleans, in 1846, state legislature decided to move the powers that be to Baton Rouge, as they feared a concentration of said power courtesy of the Big Easy's much higher population. Subsequently, in 1847, Baton Rouge would donate a $20,000 parcel of land to Louisiana that was situated atop a bluff facing the Mississippi River, and it's now believed at one point during French exploration that this locale was previously marked by tribes native to the region with a red stick or a bâton rouge. Construction of the old capitol was started in 1847 under New York architect James H. Dakin and would stretch all the way through 1852. And rather than follow suit with other state capitals, which were all designed in the image of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., Dakin would instead draw up his creation as a neo-Gothic medieval-style castle. While this capitol's appearance was loved by some, so much so that it was even included in Dabow's Review, which is still considered the most prestigious periodical in the antebellum South, it was absolutely loathed by others, such as famed American writer Mark Twain, who was a steamboat pilot at the time, and who wrote that he literally couldn't stand the sight of it. Through the Civil War, in 1862, Union Admiral David Farragut would capture New Orleans, during which time the capital was abandoned, and Union troops would utilize its grounds at first as a prison, and later to garrison African American troops under General Grover. While occupied, the building would catch fire twice and would sustain heavy damages, and following the war, by 1882, the State House was completely rebuilt under architect and engineer William A. Ferré, who is credited with the installation of its now famous spiral staircase and stained glass dome. The refurbished State House would serve its state faithfully until 1932, when it was abandoned in favor of the new Capitol. Following the establishment of this new capitol, the old site would be used to house veterans organizations and offices for the Works Progress Administration, and more recently, in 1990, the entire property was restored to host the Museum of Political History, which it remains as such to this day. In 2010, the museum visitor experience, which was designed by Bob Rogers and BRC Imagination Arts, was opened, offering an immersive way for guests to experience the past firsthand, while utilizing an interactive gallery and a plethora of educational materials. Additionally, one of this ex-capitol's main attractions is its theatrical production, The Ghost of the Castle, an entertaining performance that follows the spirit of late Baton Rouge resident Sarah Morgan Dawson, who, in life, loved the castle, and even wrote about it in her book, Sarah Morgan, The Civil War Diary of a Southern Woman, which was published in 1913. Notably, for any curious about admission to this museum, entry is actually completely free of charge and fully wheelchair accessible. But it's not all fun and games in the old capitol, and those who have braved its bounds have told of doors that open and close on their own, of disembodied voices and music heard from empty spaces, and of encounters with a range of apparitions dressed in formal attire spanning the centuries. One of the most famous apparitions to haunt the Capitol is easily that of Pierre Quevillon, a former congressman who acted as such through the mid-1800s. Now, as legend has it, old Pierre passed on within the building itself of natural causes, and his spirit, not quite done with his earthly workload, decided to stick around to tie things up. To date, a spectral man believed to be Quevillon has been sighted hurrying around the building, seemingly attending tasks from his life long since past. Of the Capitol's haunted hotspots, the basement is considered one of its most active. Once used as a space to hold aforementioned prisoners, their tortured souls are often sighted roaming the area, and many who have ventured down there tell the energy is palpable, and that their phantoms can get quite aggressive at times. Lastly, the spirit of none other than Sarah Morgan herself has been known to appear within the Capitol from time to time, drifting through the expanse unnaturally, and usually clad in an old Victorian-era dress, her soft sobs sometimes detectable from somewhere just out of sight. Number 3 has us venturing to the enchanting city of New Orleans itself, and to its infamous Lafayette Cemetery number 1. Lafayette Cemetery number 1, which is placed within the Garden District in New Orleans, Louisiana, is an iconic historic burying grounds that, over the years, has grown wildly in popularity amongst tourists to the Big Easy, due in part to its significance to the city, and also for numerous ghost sightings and local legends that have emerged from its bounds through the years. Historically speaking, Lafayette number 1 is actually the oldest of the city's 7 municipal cemeteries, and is a non-segregational yard, acts as a final resting place to immigrants from around 25 different countries in 26 states. Circa 1832, the city of New Orleans would commission surveyor Benjamin Buisson to develop a plan for a new graveyard, and incidentally, his plan would subdivide the area between First Street and Toledano, and would include an expanse laid out with 2 central aisles that overlapped in a cross pattern, and that was lined with trees to give the property a garden-like appearance, while also dividing the space into 4 different sections. Notably, this new cemetery would serve what was, at the time, the city of Lafayette, from which it would also derive its moniker. However, when New Orleans annexed the smaller community into a neighborhood, the graveyard's name would stick, and it remains to this very day. Over the years, as the cemetery grew, it would welcome a slew of architecturally significant tombs and mausoleums, many of which contained the remains of multiple members of the same families, and around 1847, the site would see some of its last open burials. More recently, in 1972, Lafayette Cemetery number 1 would be added to the National Register of Historic Places. In 1996, the World Monuments Fund would replace the yard on its watch list due to the decaying state of many of its tombs. And despite preservation efforts, in 2006, it would once again be placed on this list following heavy damages from Hurricane Katrina. One more notable and today infamous interment at Lafayette is that of Judge John Howard Ferguson of the Plessy vs. Ferguson case, who, after one Homer Plessy, who was 1/8 African American, was arrested for sitting in what was deemed a white passenger car, actually ruled against him and that Louisiana had the right to regulate railroad companies operating within the state's bounds, resulting in a mess of legal trouble and in a strong outcry for civil rights that, ironically, had the exact opposite effect on society that the old judge likely intended, and that today is still recognized as an extreme violation of personal liberty and freedom. Also buried within the expanse is the body of Brigadier General Harry T. Hayes, who led the 1st Louisiana Brigade for the Confederacy through the Civil War, as well as the Brune family, who were popular jazz musicians associated with Papa Lane and the New Orleans Rhythm Kings. In pop culture, Lafayette Cemetery number 1 is also associated with famous romantic horror writer Anne Rice, as the place holding both the tomb of her Mayfair witches and also as the tomb of the dreaded vampire Lestat. While Lafayette Cemetery number 1 is currently closed, we've heard rumors that several tour groups are allowed within its bounds. So while this one won't be open to the public for some time, those who are especially driven may be able to find a way to brave its grounds, if for nothing more than a ghost tour. Over its lengthy existence, Lafayette Cemetery number 1 has become synonymous with Louisianan hauntings, and those who have been fortunate enough to explore its bounds have reported extreme cold spots felt on otherwise hot days, the feeling of being followed by someone or something unseen, and encounters with a range of apparitions in clothing spanning the eras, some that appear so solid that those nearby believe them living, breathing people or period actors, before watching them either disappear entirely or walk straight through sealed crypts. Some of the most famous stories surrounding this aged boneyard come from those who frequent its nearby streets. As these fables go, while passing by at night, many have described sighting shadowy figures lurking about the yard, with several more horrifying accounts detailing parties who have actually been chased or even attacked by these ghastly manifestations, and others have reported hearing eerie knocking sounds coming from within the tombs, as if, some tell it, the spirits are seeking to return from the beyond. Lastly, during various early epidemics, namely related to yellow fever, the Garden District in New Orleans would begin spacing their homes further apart and adorning surrounding lands with lush gardens in order to quarantine themselves from the general populace as best they could. Unfortunately, this would have the exact opposite effect, as their gardens, complete with water features, would prove a ripe breeding ground for mosquitoes, which resulted in the disease spreading even faster. Sadly, yellow fever is responsible for filling a good portion of the plots within the cemetery, and to date, many have detailed encounters with full-bodied apparitions in old-fashioned attire that appear sick, sweaty, jaundiced, and with nasty coughs or vomiting, all signature symptoms of the deadly virus. Sticking with New Orleans, number 4 has us donning our Sunday best for the ever-famous St. Louis Cathedral. The St. Louis Cathedral, or officially Cathedral Basilica of St. Louis, King of France, which is located in New Orleans, Louisiana, is the seat of the local archdiocese and the oldest continuously utilized cathedral in the whole of the United States. That, alongside its reputation for devout worship, has also amassed a great deal of infamy due to its purported hauntings and tales of encounters with the otherworldly. Historically, lands now holding this cathedral have, since 1718 and the founding of the city, hosted no less than 3 separate Catholic churches. The first church held on site was constructed under the French colony and was a simple wooden building that served the community faithfully for about 7 years. Construction of the second church, which was designed as a brick and timber building and to replace the first, would span from 1725 to 1727 and would serve the city for a much longer period of time. Sadly, this second building would be destroyed in 1788 in the Great New Orleans Fire, after which, a year later, in 1789, the cornerstone for a third church, being the start of our modern cathedral, was laid, and the project wouldn't be completed until 1794, amidst the Spanish Louisiana period. Now, a year before its construction was finished, in 1793, the St. Louis Church was elevated to cathedral status, marking it as one of the oldest cathedrals in the U.S. In 1819, a central tower with a clock and bell was added. In 1827, the mortuary chapel was dedicated, and in 1849, the diocese would launch a massive restoration and reconstruction of the property. During this reconstruction, unfortunately, the earlier central tower would collapse, after which, through the following year, most of the cathedral we know today was finished in the old cathedral's stead, with pieces of the bell tower being reused in the new building. Sadly, on April 25th of 1909, a dynamite bomb was set off within the St. Louis Cathedral, resulting in a portion of the foundation collapsing and in mandatory repairs. Through the early 1900s, Mass at the Cathedral, which was originally offered in French, was also then offered in English, and by the 1920s, it was reported that a good bulk of the church's parishioners understood English, resulting in a swift decline in French Masses. More recently, in 1964, the cathedral was designated as a minor basilica by Pope Paul VI, and in 1987, it was visited by Pope John Paul II. Seemingly unable to catch a break, in 2005, the roof of the cathedral was torn apart courtesy of Hurricane Katrina, while the interior also sustained damages. And following the storm, the site's organ would be sent off for repairs that lasted until 2008, during which time a substitute electrical organ was utilized. The St. Louis Cathedral remains open into the present, drawing in crowds for its service and tourists in its off time, both of whom are often interested in either its history or in the supposed ghostly activity experienced within. Before the cathedral came to being, lands now holding the site were, way back when, actually used to bury the city's dead. So as eerie as it sounds, each step inside is one taken over the graves of countless late city residents. And it's this chilling fact that has actually acted as a catalyst for some of the construct's spookiest ghost stories. As local legend tells it, the disruption of their final resting places left spirits of the many interred just below the ground quite restless. And across the cathedral's premises, both staff and visitors have reported doors that open and slam shut on their own, disembodied voices speaking various languages, and encounters with a slew of apparitions in clothing spanning back centuries. Informal investigations of the expanse have yielded high EMF levels, chilling EVPs, orbs in photography, and hits on spirit boxes, while others have described feeling as if they're constantly under watch. Some say due to the overprotective souls of former priests or clergymen, forever guarding their sacred sanctuary. Easily the most famous St. Louis tale lends itself to one Pere Antoine, who was a Spanish Capuchin friar that arrived to New Orleans circa 1774, when he was assigned as the church's pastor. Over the years, Antoine grew into something of a folk hero through the immeasurable kindness he showed the city's populace, and when he passed on in 1829, his death was met with widespread mourning for 3 whole days before his body was laid to rest right within the cathedral. Since this fateful day, the full-bodied apparition of Antoine has been sighted around the cathedral, usually right near the altar or on the balconies, and he has even been known to manifest to those in need, who sometimes believe him a living person, and whose questions he answers with the utmost clarity, before astonishingly fading away. But Antoine isn't the only famous ghost known to frequent this ever-popular place of worship, and within the St. Louis, many have also documented run-ins with the specter of another priest, being that of Pere Dagobert, who preceded Antoine, as well as with the ominous entity of Madame Delphine Lalaurie, whose cruelty in life has since become a tale of great infamy, and whose presence is known to lurk within her old home as well, being the Lalaurie Mansion, where she tortured her servants. But I'll save that story for another upload. And last but not least, for number 5, I decided to go with a lesser known but locally infamous haunt, being that of the dreaded Potter Road. Potter Road, which is placed near the village of Doylen, which is located in the Webster Parish in northwestern Louisiana, is a small, quaint forest route cutting through a classic southern community of under 900 residents, whose bounds have grown in popularity amongst historians and tourists for their numerous museums and landmarks, amongst nature enthusiasts and sportsmen for their plentiful lakes, trails, hunting, and fishing opportunities, and amongst paranormal investigators due to a wide range of purported cryptid encounters and good old-fashioned ghost stories. Historically, the roots of Doylen stretch way back to 1885, when, where the town now sits, a whistle stop and depot on the Vicksburg, Shreveport, and Pacific Railroad was completed, preceding which it was named after prominent early Tennessean settler Downs Brewster Doyle, who had migrated to the area to what was then Bossier Parish in around 1843. Subsequently, D.B. Doyle, or Captain Doyle as he was more affectionately referred to, would later marry one Emmeline Austin, after which, over the years, the couple would welcome 14 children into the world, all of whom that would grow to either live in or farm the area. Through their development of the region, additional families from all over the country would move to the locale and would follow suit. Through the late 1800s, the captain would establish the area's first schoolhouse, from which he was the primary educator. In 1885, Old DB would donate the Doylen Methodist Church, and through the start of the 20th century, several more schoolhouses were built in order to replace or update previous accommodations. By the 1920s, personal businesses would begin sprouting up through Doylen. During the same era, the timber industry would grow locally. Through the Great Depression, the region would be hit especially hard as cotton prices plummeted. And in 1933, following the establishment of Barksdale Field, a bulk of town youth would enlist in the Air Force. By 1937, the International Paper Company would construct a mill in Spring Hill, where a large majority of men from the parish went to work. Through World War II, men from Doylen old enough to enlist would serve, while children would scavenge scrap metal to help the war effort. In 1948, Doylen was officiated as an incorporated village under Governor Earl Long, and in 1950, Lake Bistineau State Park was open to the public, greatly increasing traffic to the township while providing countless jobs. More recently, in 1967, Doylen's first town hall and volunteer fire station were completed. Into the present, Doylen has remained a small but heavily trafficked area, courtesy of its small-town restaurants, secluded lodgings, trailheads, parklands, water features, and much, much more. Most of which is popular to those from bigger cities seeking a quiet retreat from their busy lives. Now, spanning southwest of the township lies the infamous Potter Road, which is a semi-paved route cutting past farmlands and dense forests, and that likely existed as some form of trail through the wilds long before civilization arrived. Chillingly, the length of Potter Road has seemingly always been saturated in old hill folklore and disturbing local legends, and those who have braved a drive or, more terrifyingly, a walk along it have reported a wide range of supernatural experiences, including shadowy figures sighted in surrounding foliage, extreme cold spots and patches of fog that descend upon the route when the weather is clear and hot, and disembodied voices, footsteps, or hoofbeats heard from just out of sight. Easily the most famous Potter Road legend tells that long ago, possibly through the 1970s, and following a local homecoming celebration or game, 4 teens were driving through the area late at night, drunk, when they lost control of their vehicle and crashed head-on into a thick pine tree. By the time the wreckage was discovered, everyone inside the car was deceased, and following their deaths, a cross was positioned in front of the very tree that took their lives. But the story doesn't stop there, and those who traveled Potter following the accident and after dark reported sighting blood running from the tree to the cross. Over the years, the site became something of a local proving grounds, where teens looking to test their mettle would accept dares to stand between the tree and cross alone, in the middle of the night, and many who did so described hearing the phantom screeching of tires, screams, and muffled, panicked voices emanating from thin air. Later, however, through the 1990s, an unknown party actually stole the crash site's cross. Following this theft, it said activity near the tree became much stronger, and those passing through the area began reporting blood instead running directly up the tree, and hearing voices from the branches above. Could these voices be the lingering remnants of the victims from that fateful night so long ago? Investigations of Potter Road have yielded high EMF levels even in the absence of electricity, orbs captured in photography and video, and hits on communicative devices such as Ouija boards. And several more spine-tingling accounts describe instances in which drivers are followed by ghost cars, where odd voices are heard through radio static, and in well-maintained vehicles that stall out inexplicably, or that, after parking in especially isolated areas, refuse to start entirely. Lastly, Potter Road is also rumored to be a hotspot for cryptid encounters, and reports of run-ins with fearsome monsters range from skunk ape to rougarou to Louisiana's own urban legend being the Grunch, which, according to lore, are a tribe of disfigured hominid creatures that live in the woods, that are sometimes described as appearing almost human, and at others as something closer to the Jersey Devil, being a man mixed with various animal parts. Perturbingly, Grunch are often associated to unexplained disappearances and have been known to attack stranded motorists, hikers, and campers from the shadows when they least expect it. Thanks for joining me on this adventure through some of the most haunted places in Louisiana. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you feel could use a good scare. I'll catch you all next time.